Come light it up, I'm ready to go. Come light it up, come light it up, I'm ready to go. Come light it up.
Hi, thank you both for joining us.
Hi.
Thank you for having us, Monica.
Okay, I'm going to let you to it, Justin. Go for it.
All right, sounds good. Well, Matt, I'm incredibly excited to have you here. For those of you who don't know, Matt Turck is a partner at Firstmark, where he focuses primarily on early stage enterprise investing in the US and Europe. And Matt and I have known each other. I was trying to do the math. I would say at least 12 years, maybe even longer than that. And it's actually been incredible because it was about 12 years ago that you created your first version of this data landscape. And I put it on the screen here just for everybody to get a picture of this. This was, again, the 2012 big data landscape, much simpler than it is today. We'll show you the 2024 version in a moment. But also happened to be back when I was doing my first startup, which was on that first landscape. Very, very proud.
Yeah, I was just checking, like Adapt was there.
Yes, we were in that Hadoop bucket there with Cloudera. And then, of course, fast forward to today, 2024, Starburst is in here somewhere, but much harder to read these days, Matt. I'd love your perspective on the evolution over the decade plus, I guess 12 years now that you've been maintaining this. What are some of your own main takeaways during this evolution?
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, not to promote my own content too much here, but there is an interactive version of this if anybody wants to check it out, which is at mad.firstmark.com, and it's that, but it's searchable. When you click on the logo, you have tiles. So if you're looking for Starburst or Trino, you just search those terms and they will appear because, so to your question, and the very obvious answer to this in terms of the last 10 years is that it's gotten incredibly crowded out there. So that first landscape that you showed probably had something like 200 logos. And I think this one has something like 2011. We're actually even debating whether we could go to 2024 for the 2024 version and sort of be cute about it, but felt like it was too crowded as it was. So look, that's a very obvious, the very obvious takeaway, which considerably increases complexity. Which I think ultimately plays very nicely to the Starburst story, but maybe we can get into that. So lots of companies, that's one aspect, and then the other thing is, if there's one constant, it's actually change. And if you think over the last 10, 12 years, it's just like one thing after the other, right? It was we started from the world of sort of traditional data warehouses, your ex-employer and ex-acquirer, Justin, the Teradatas of the world. Mm-hmm. And then we went into Hadoop, and then we went into cloud data warehouses and into leg houses, and I guess now ice houses. So it just like changes, every 5 minutes or so, which, I think is a fundamentally good thing, but creates complexity and confusion.
100%. And I will say, at least in the Starburst journey, we first raised venture capital in 2019, not too long after actually being on your data-driven New York City meetup event, which was great. And I used your slides actually in my fundraising pitch because it really highlights the Cambrian explosion of data sources that customers wrestle with. And of course, Trino and Starburst provide this ability to join a table that lives in another system with a table that you might have sitting in your lake. And so it was the perfect setup. So I guess thank you for the assist in helping to tell that story along the way.
See, VC's adding value right there.
Absolutely. And I'm curious, one of the things that you actually documented, I think from the beginning, was also open source projects and the role that they play in that ecosystem. Do you think that there's been rising popularity? How do you think about the role of the open source technologies in your landscape over time?
Yeah, I mean, there's been an increase in popularity, but like I would probably even argue that the data infrastructure world is open source native. That open source has been the one of the key fundamental characteristics of the ecosystem from the beginning, or at least from the Hadoop day. If you think of like all the important projects, the vast majority has a open source community at the root of it. So whether Hadoop or Spark or Kafka and so on and so forth. And look, we as investors are huge fans of open source. I think I mean, there's a spectrum of like different thoughts on the topic, and some investors prefer closed source. But for me, like I'm trying to rack my brain and think. I think all my enterprise software investments in the last X many years has been open source, whether SerialDB, Cockroach Labs, ClickHouse, QuickQuit, and so on and so forth. I just think it's very hard to build an enterprise software business these days, especially in data that doesn't have an open source component. If nothing else, because it's a fantastic way of getting product feedback, and then most importantly, because it's a built-in distribution mechanism. And in a world where there's a lot of very smart technical people out there building very impressive technical products, you need distribution to be built in for success. And yes, open source has issues around monetization, which I think to some extent have been solved through experience over the last few years. But yeah, I'm a huge open source fan, and indeed, open source has been super important for the data world, and I think that's a great thing.
Absolutely. I will +1 my own enthusiasm for open source. And I think distribution is a huge piece of it. You're absolutely right, especially if there's any aspiring entrepreneurs in the audience. Getting distribution is one of those classic sort of bootstrapping problems early in a company's life cycle. And open source has a potential to go viral. And when we first got Starburst off the ground, we had users in Singapore, in China, in Japan, truly on a global basis, which allowed us to really get the business off the ground. So a lot of benefits, both from it.
And it's and it's also a way to for a very small company to work with a very large company. So the classic rule in the collective wisdom in tech that if you're a small company, you should not sell to Fortune 1000 type of companies, because you're going to get suffocated in procurement and all the things, because they operate on a timeline that's very different from the timeline that you operate on as a startup. But open source is sort of the magical unlock for that, which is that, first, because the code is open source, people feel more comfortable. And two, you can reach those very large corporations through the actual end user that tends to be the developer in that case, without having to go through the whole, complexity of just like approaching some VP on the business side and then having them, find the right technical person to, bring into the fold. So it's like I said, it's to the point that like I can't, never say never, and maybe my next investment will be closed source, but like I can't think of any reason for any young company to not be open source, with a lot of nuances, but like directionally.
100% agree with you on that. Thinking about 2024 and now maybe starting to look into 2025, are there repeated challenges that you're seeing, as you talk to customers and canvas the landscape? Are there repeated challenges that you're seeing pop up in the data space today, either in architecture or process or mindset or anything else?
Yeah, I mean, so look, there's something that's always true, and then there's something that's more specific to 2024. The thing that's always true is that and maybe I should have answered that when you asked me about the constant through the last 10 years, is that like as much as technology is very important, and there's like this dramatic evolution, and the next technology becomes better than the prior one, and so on and so forth. Ultimately, the sheer importance of like people and processes in all the data discussions, like since the Hadoop day, that was already what people were talking about, and fast forward to 2024, it's still what people talk about. that just so I think like people in the space should really bear that in mind, because it sort of feels like a really important part of the battle. It's not just about like pure performance of the technology. It's like how about you weave in humans and processes into the mix. So that's one thing. And then the thing that's more specific to 2024 is obviously AI. I'm sure you must have had a role throughout Datanova that people need to take a shot each time the word AI is mentioned. So this is the first time in this panel.
Yes, maybe for this session, absolutely.
Yeah, but it's I think it's like yet another sort of like wrench thrown into into the whole thing, because like now people are just even more everybody's excited and should be excited because it is very important, but equally it's like yet another layer of complexity of like, okay, well, there's like that other kind of emerging stack where like, okay, I do RAG, do I need a vector database? What is a vector database? Do I need a vector database? Where does the data come from? Do I need to train the model? Do I need to fine tune the model? If I fine tune the model with my own data, where's the data? There's like this whole thing. So there's like yet another kind of like parallel stack. And everybody's trying to figure out whether there can be a one data infrastructure stack that sort of rules it all, that has like the different components that you need, or whether you need to assemble like a bunch of different solutions. And so that's something that's very top of mind in all the conversations I have.
Makes sense. Yeah, we had a statistic, I think, yesterday that was basically 87% of businesses want to incorporate AI immediately, but only 37% feel prepared to do so. So yeah. Clearly, there's a gap between the interest and really knowing how to get started on that. Yeah, please.
No, I think the nuance there, it's something like everybody I think about a lot. So it sort of depends what doing AI mean, and I think the future is actually probably going to be like a combination. It's actually sort of going to be a new version of what we currently have with SaaS, which is that you're going to have like external vendors that sell point solutions in the cloud that do one thing, but like in sort of press a button and it happens. And then you're going to have the world of like homegrown software. Or that you currently have in SaaS, where like there's a whole universe of like custom built solutions, and I think the future of AI is probably going to be that as well. There's going to be more kind of like SaaS AI application where I want my a little bit like GitHub Pilot, I guess. I want my AI coder, press a button and there it is. And there's going to be a whole universe of building your own AI applications internally for all the stuff that's more specific to you. So if you're a pharma company, what does that mean to do AI or generative AI in the context of a pharma company? If you're a bank, and so on and so forth. So I think there's going to be a combination of those two things. And for the latter, 100%, you have a big question around whether you're prepared for it, and that importantly involves having your data house in order, which then dovetails into the whole discussion around, okay, well, where do you store your data? How do you query your data? Where's the storage? Where's the compute? And all the things. So that's going to accelerate this whole ecosystem where you guys live and others live as well. But so when people say they're not prepared to do AI, so what does that mean? Does it mean having an external vendor, and then the question is already around use cases and processes, or does that mean doing your own AI, building your own AI applications internally? In which case, it's the former, but it's also like a bunch of like data related work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. And certainly one thing that we've seen is that the separation of storage and compute, or even maybe more precisely, the decoupling of storage formats from compute engines has created an opportunity, it seems, for customers in terms of being able to mix and match engines and formats. I'm curious how you see the value of uncoupling these components for the future of the data ecosystem.
Yeah, well, that's the big story of the year, right? Or the big story of the last maybe couple of years. And it's sort of fascinating to watch, right? Because look, the idea that you could have a compute layer, storage layer, we're not completely locked in, Yeah, of course, everybody likes that. Like nobody wants to be stuck with one vendor. But it's fascinating to see, fast forward to 2024, that the market pressure has forced vendors into being like more open and not locking people in the storage layer. So I think it's a wonderful thing for the ecosystem, a wonderful thing for customers. I think it creates all sorts of challenges for vendors, but I think that's a fundamental thing. The whole idea of hey. You want to do, big data, take all your data and put it in one repository, which happens to be mine. And by the way, it's all proprietary. And by the way, even the query language is proprietary, and you're going to be stuck forever. You should really do that. That's a really great idea.
Yep.
So obviously, from a customer standpoint, that was never a great idea. And the separation of storage and compute and the rise of open, storage formats like the icebergs and hoodies and Delta Lakes has been a wonderful thing. And the fact that it accelerated this year, but it's obviously what Starburst has been telling everyone for a long time. So you were ahead of your time.
I appreciate that, and agree with everything that you said there. I'm curious, would you agree that Iceberg has now established itself as that de facto format? And if so, why do you think that is?
Yeah, it's a good question. It seems that way. Why that is, I'm sure there's a smart answer to this. Like, I'm not sure I have the answer. Like, it seems. Look, I would guess that Delta Lake was probably a little too tied to the Spark community and maybe too sort of tethered to Databricks as an identity, whereas Iceberg arguably was sort of like more open, not just an open source, not as an open source project, but as an open standard. And Tabular being a much smaller company, maybe they didn't feel like there was this kind of like corporate overlord over the community, so I would guess that it sort of like felt more of a community, more open, but I don't know for a fact. That's just my sentiment.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, and I think then that was sort of cemented this summer as both Snowflake and Databricks announced support for Iceberg. So that now gave customers the opportunity to say, okay, with this format, I have interoperability. And at least that's what we're seeing in terms of what we see a lot of customers looking for is like, hey, we want to build an architecture that's going to stand the test of time. Open source technologies are one great way to do that. Open standards are another. In this case with Iceberg, you sort of get both, where I can now mix and match my engine. I can play different engines off of each other. I can have them compete on cost performance. While storing the data in this one format now that everybody sort of agrees they'll support, which I think is exciting. I think to your earlier points, this is a real sea change in the way that data warehousing it is done and will be done for many years to come for sure. I'm curious, do you see ETL providers now prioritizing lake and lakehouse architectures with these open formats like Iceberg over cloud data warehouses? Or please tell me more.
Well, I mean the whole ecosystem is accelerating around this, right? It's sort of this interesting evolution of the modern data stack. Maybe the modern data stack is more becoming the modern lakehouse stack, or whatever cute way of there's probably some tweet in here to think about. Yes, yeah, I'm sure somebody beat me to it by a year or something. Look, the modern data stack that really gravitated around Snowflake, and to a lesser extent BigQuery and Redshift. The whole ecosystem sort of gravitated around that as the center of of gravity, and then like everybody needed to be deeply compatible with Snowflake. So you had all the ETL vendors, optimized for that. And then, they had the whole, the whole DBT thing, and then visualization on the other side. And now that it feels like there's some movement towards the lake house or potentially ice house architecture, everybody's sort of adapting to that. So, ETL vendors are doing what they need to do. ETL vendors want to win. They are in the data movement kind of world. So if the data is now increasingly moving to lake houses versus warehouses, they need to be very compatible with this. So I think like everybody's doing that, right? Like I think was like over the summer, I think Fivetran announced some kind of support, and just like caught randomly, like just a couple of days, I think Airbyte made some announcements as well. But in our portfolio of a company called Estuary that does sort of both real time and batch data movement, including a lot of change data capture and this report, like house Databricks as well. So it makes perfect sense for that whole ecosystem to sort of reform around the lake house as a default architecture. I mean, look, as much as we love that whole trend, Snowflake is still a very important player, and warehouses is still a very important player in the space, even with all the momentum. I should say that in fairness.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even we would agree that like we don't expect Snowflake to disappear or go away. I think the beauty of Iceberg as a format is it allows you to actually be more workload specific, where you might move some workloads to a different engine and really have that flexibility as you've standardized on a storage format that you control, which is very interesting. And I agree. I think with the ETL providers now all supporting data transfer into lakes, it just reinforces this reference architecture and the importance of lakehouse as an architecture. We love Estuary, by the way.
Yeah.
Work with them a lot. Love Dave Yaffe and the team. So plug there for one of the portfolio companies.
Yes, awesome. Yeah.
Yes.
My job is done here. No, but but what's fascinating about this market movement is what it actually means for Snowflake and even Databricks versus a Starburst, right? Because as much as I was joking that it was not the greatest idea from a customer perspective to lock in all your data in one place. Obviously, from a vendor perspective, that was a super excellent idea. So what happens to a Snowflake in a world where your data can be anywhere, and from the query engine's perspective, it just looks like a bunch of tables, floating around. That's potentially super disruptive. And even Databricks. I mean, like Databricks has had this very smart strategy around being open from day one and all the things. But fundamentally, they're also in that business of just putting all your data in one place. It can be it's they're embracing their own disruption, but it's disruption nonetheless. And it's interesting to see how the attempt at locking in people, which is very important. I mean, locking always sounds bad, but like that's the reason why those businesses are able to survive. So it's the right thing for them to do, and there's no it's not like they're very dishonest or whatever. Is just doing the right thing for the business. But it's interesting to see how that attempt to lock in is moving now from the storage layer to the catalog, right? It's like the next battle where you wanna provide another reason for people to stick around through the catalog.
Yeah, so that's great that you brought that up. To double click on that, how do you see that landscape evolving? Obviously, Snowflake introduced the Polaris catalog as an open source catalog alternative. Probably one of the biggest moves they've made from an open source perspective in their history, which is exciting. Obviously, there are a lot of independent players in the catalog space as well. How do you see that part of the stack evolving?
Yeah, I think now that it's become this strategic battleground between Snowflake and Databricks, I think it makes things more complicated for independent vendors. Look, you could argue it's either way because obviously catalogs are great, sort of like distributed query kind of world. So the more your data is all over the place, and the more you're in that architecture where you're hybrid, you're multi-repository, and you search it all through Starburst, the more it matters to know where your data is and how you can access it. So there's an argument for independent vendors from that perspective. But equally to the since it's become a strategic battleground between Databricks and Snowflake, I think there's going to be a lot of market pull towards the solutions, especially if one is open source. And I guess Databricks is not open source yet, right? That was the whole thing, and Snowflake was trying to pressure Databricks into open sourcing. That hasn't happened, right? I didn't miss anything.
There are small parts that are open source, but most would agree not really open source.
Yeah.
I think
So I think it's Snowflake putting a lot of weight behind an open source thing to say, hey, see, we're open source. We're more open source than the next guy. I think that makes things more complicated for data catalogs. And I know data catalogs in the first place as independent vendors, that was always a category that I thought was conceptually very interesting, but it's like so crowded. There's like so many different companies, and there hasn't been a lot of consolidation yet. I don't think. I think Stemma was acquired like a couple of years ago, but I think that's pretty much, unless I'm blanking. But so the combination of summarize the two giants making this a strategic battleground on the one hand, then on the other hand, like a bunch of venture funded catalog companies fighting for business. I think that's I think that space is both very important but a kind of a challenge.
Makes sense. Yeah, we think Polaris is actually a really interesting move by Snowflake because it is open. They did contribute it to the Apache Software Foundation, so we'll have an open governance layer. We've actually decided we're going to start working on that project as well. And we'll see. It may become the open option. I also think each of the engines will continue to have their own catalog options built in as well. We have one, we call it Gravity, so it's yet another choice in the mix. But open technologies always offer the most opportunity for interoperability with other platforms.
I think that's exactly right. I think catalogs as part of a platform, as part of a solution, makes a lot of sense. The question from which is maybe outside of the scope of this conversation, but the question from a venture investor perspective, at least a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, whenever that was whether you could have like self-standing independent companies doing just catalogs, and I think the market is evolving in a way that is probably. Is bringing a negative answer to that question, but I don't know. Like, we'll see.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. I think it's going to be a feature of the engines, and then maybe there's an open option like perhaps Polaris, or if you're in the AWS ecosystem, maybe Glue. But I think probably hard to build a standalone company. I would agree with you there. Moving on to your landscape for 2025, maybe we can get some sneak previews here as you're thinking about it for next year. Other than adding probably yet even more companies to further expand it, what are you looking at? What do you expect for 2025? And maybe I'll ask a provocative question. Do you think that we'll see, whether it's next year or at some point in the future, perhaps any reverse of that trend, any consolidation in the space? Because obviously the venture dynamic has changed a bit over the years. Curious how you see all of this playing out.
Yeah, so indeed, the key question. So there's the landscape itself, and then there's like more importantly the underlying reality. So like sort of the map versus the territory. On the landscape itself, we're actually probably going to trim it down a little bit this year. So like, as much as we loved having more logos every year, and that's kind of like the cool thing, and then the landscape makes its way to like a bunch of presentations at conferences just to show how crazy it is. Like, as much as we've done that, I think with like 2,000 logos, we sort of reached the limit of anything that's actually usable. So we're probably actually going to make it a little more exclusive and trim out like a few hundred a few hundred companies. It will still be very crowded, by the way, because a little bit to our discussion, the discussion we were having a minute ago about AI and data, a big principle to this whole effort has been to show the interconnection between the data infrastructure world and AI, and especially as you build AI applications and generative AI applications, more and more these days you're going to need, the need for core data infrastructure is greater than ever. So it's going to remain crowded because we have those two things that we could arguably break down into two landscapes, but we made the fundamental editorial decision to keep everything together. So that's one thing on the landscape. So it's going to get smaller, but largely because we want to keep it usable. Now, to the more important question on consolidation. Look, we've been all expecting consolidation for a number of years now. When the market started going bad in 2004 to 2021, everybody thought that 22, 23 was going to be the year of consolidation. As it turns out, a lot of startups did exactly the right thing, which was to cut burn and extend runway. But we're sort of getting now to a stage where, after extending the runway by like another year or two, finally they are at the end of what they can do, and sadly enough for the entire ecosystem. And by the way, that's enterprise software, not just data infrastructure, but the enterprise software market still remains tough. There's been this recession that like people don't always talk about unless you are in this world. But there's been a recession in enterprise software. Budgets have been tight. So tight budgets, slow growth, plus runways that are starting to get very finite. I think we're finally getting to the stage where some of this stuff is going to happen, and you could argue some of it has already happened in the last sort of 6 to 9 months. But I think that's going to accelerate, except if the market just picks up again. It's not awesome. Like, we VCs, invest in companies because we love working with entrepreneurs and startups and all the things. So like the whole Darwinian aspect of a bunch of companies failing one way or the other, either going out of business or being acqui-hired, that kind of stuff is really not fun, and nobody's looking forward to that, and nobody wants that, whether in one's portfolio or outside. But I think that's inevitably going to happen. We were talking about data catalogs. If you think that data catalog as a category is not going to produce one winner that could be a self-standing, public company. So if you don't think that, then what about the 27 companies that are currently in that category? I'm making the number of, but directionally something like that. Something's going to have to happen. So hopefully those are acquisitions, and hopefully nobody goes out of business or But that's going to happen, and that's sort of separate from the AI stack, which has more momentum. But and look, ultimately, circling back to the very beginning of the conversation, super crowded market, keeps where everything keeps changing, but everything is like super complex. I think from a customer perspective, which ultimately is what we all want to do, right? We want to build products and companies that serve customers' interests. The fact that there would be consolidation and less vendors to work with, as long as it's not a concentration in 2 vendors, which I don't think is a good situation at all. I think having less than 40, more than 2, but less than 40 is a good thing.
Makes sense. Well, I have one last question for you. Obviously you're in the business of investing in early stage companies. What are the things that you look for when you're investing in startups? Again, there could be aspiring data entrepreneurs out there in the audience. So I want to give you an opportunity to sort of talk about what you look for as you invest.
Yeah, so I'm an early stage investor, so I do mostly Series A, but a little bit of seed, and a big fan of anything that has to do with data infrastructure, machine learning, and AI, which has been my thing my whole time at FirstMark and even before that. So I'm always excited to connect with entrepreneurs doing interesting things in any of those spaces, whether at the infra layer or the application layer. But on the whole, more kind of like enterprise software, B2B, although we as a firm can do, certainly AI applications and that type of stuff. FirstMark did a lot of consumer investing as well, like interest in Airbnb and Discord and all the things. So as a firm, we can do everything, but like me, more early stage, like I said, data infra, machine learning, AI. from infra to applications. And then in terms of what I'm less what I'm looking for, but what I think makes company successful, I think I would just circle back to a little bit to what I was saying at the beginning. I think the sort of like the ability to both build a very technical product, but also have a little bit of a flair for distribution, marketing, building a brand. I think that's the more I do this job, the more for technical companies that tends to be the secret. People that just truly enjoy working with customers, but like also understand the importance of like, hey, we do need to have communities, we do need to have a brand. We like those things matter, and even though I'm a super technical person, that may not come as naturally to me. I understand the importance of it. I think that's as one key recipe for success. Like I've seen that again and again.
Makes total sense, and I think your landscape validates that, or the evolution certainly validates that. It's a crowded world, and you need to find a way to break out of that noise. So, thank you so much, 100%. Matt, for your time. This has been a real pleasure. And Monica, I will turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks, everyone.